Okay, good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome to this morning's Foresight webinar looking at offshore marine energy in the UK. My name's Tiernan. I'm conference producer here at Foresight Events. I'll be the moderator for today. Just going to leave it a moment to see if there's any more latecomers joining the call. But while we do that, just a quick opening from me. Just about Foresight Events, we are a clean tech growth industries company. So we look across the energy sector at emerging markets and new technologies and existing technologies that are pushing us towards net zero and a sustainable energy mix. Really excited for today's session, looking at offshore marine energy. Got a great panel across innovation delivery, project delivery, and also supply chain as well. And I think it's really a very exciting time to be having this call. You know, there's been a number of developments within the sector. Most notably, the establishment of the Marine Energy Task Force, and we're delighted to have Sue join us today. So it's going to give a stronger voice, I think, to the industry, and also coordinate priorities and set a clear roadmap for the sector. We had the recent University of Edinburgh report, which really clearly outlined, both the economic and power potential of this sector as well. So that's really good to see. And also, we've seen some really strong performances within the contracts for different scheme and the different auction rounds as well. So a lot to get into today, and I think it's a good time to be having this conversation to discuss, the challenges that remain there, but also the opportunities for the sector. So we have four speakers today. First is Sue Bartlett-Reed, as I mentioned, Chair of the Marine Energy Council and newly formed Marine Energy Task Force as well. Sue, you're very welcome. Hopefully we will have Richard Parkinson, Managing Director of Inyanga Marine. Richard's just having a few issues getting in this morning. We're trying to solve them and get him in the call. Hopefully we will. We have Eileen Linklater, who's Corporate Affairs Director at the European Marine Energy Centre. And last but not least, John Macleod, who's Commercial and HSEQ Director at Leask Marine. So you're all very welcome this morning. Sue, I'm wondering if I can bring you in first, if you want to introduce yourself and who you are. Not that I think you need much introduction, but that'd be great. And if you can talk a little bit about the Marine Task Force and how that's taking shape and some of the priorities for that as well, that'd be great. So, Sue, I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Tiernan, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here to talk about marine energy, which, as Tiernan rightly pointed out, is gaining a little bit more of an audience in terms of government and in terms of our energy system. So my name is Sue Bartlett-Reed. I'm fortunate enough to have spent around 25 years working in the marine energy sector, both as a project developer, originally a regulator, and an offshore surveyor. So really interested in seeing this industry progress, having that long heritage of both working with technology and project developers to try and make this a reality, both here in the UK, but also globally. And I think that's really important that we set the UK in the context of the global market and global potential for wave and tidal stream technologies. So as Tiernan rightly said, I am chair of something called the Marine Energy Council. For those of you that are not aware of the Marine Energy Council, we are now an industry association that was set up during 2018 at the All Energy Conference, really to address the lack of market access for tidal stream technology in particular, but also our wave technologies here in the UK. So we'd seen emergence of the revenue mechanism, the contracts for difference, but there was no route to market through that contracts for difference allocation for wave and tidal stream. And the industry had recognised that without a route to market, it was becoming increasingly challenging to commercialise technologies in particular, to mobilise supply chains, to grow companies in the way that we needed to do, and really to see the investment that was needed to bring this technology to the fore. I suspect that most of us on this call have an understanding of the energy system and of what wave and tidal stream technologies are. But we as the Marine Energy Council do feel that it's incredibly important that these two technologies are included in the energy mix. And there's a whole host of good data and rationale. I can see some of you on the call may have been involved in some of the publications and some of the reports that we've seen come out that really state the need for these forms of energy generation in our energy system. And it's largely around predictability, but it also sits across what I think is a kind of policy seesaw, which is around the cost of energy and the need to grow our economy. And the two are not polar, they're not detached from each other, they're really important and linked to each other. And the Marine Energy Council is looking to kind of bridge that gap for wave and tidal stream technology to understand the economic benefits, the supply chain growth, the benefits to our system in terms of distribution costs and energy generation, but also set in the context of energy markets and what we need in terms of lower levelized cost of energy and affordability. And I think there's a role for this industry to play. Historically, we've been seen as an emerging sector, so one that is really at a low technology readiness level, perhaps a little too expensive, perhaps sitting within the innovation space. You'll hear from the European Marine Energy Centre and Eileen and also Leask Marine, who've been involved in a number of the deployments here in the UK. But we have now significant numbers of generational hours onto the grid from operational tidal stream technology. We're developing more technology here in the UK than anywhere else in the world. We have more potential for installed capacity through both public and private investment into infrastructure, through test and demo sites, so the European Marine Energy Centre and Morlais up in the north coast of Wales. So we really have an opportunity to see this grow. And the Marine Energy Council was very keen to engage with government and policymakers to ensure that the direction of travel was correct and that we removed some of those barriers to growth. So we set up, or proposed that we set up, to UK government something called the Marine Energy Task Force, which you would have heard referenced. And gladly, we were running on the back of both the Solar Energy Task Force and the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, which are looking at strategic route maps for delivery of sectors that we know will both decarbonise our energy system, increase the economy and see growth. And we really wanted to follow that model with the Marine Energy Task Force. So we put a proposal to UK government to have the task force as an industry government forum to really understand some of these policy challenges, some of the barriers to development. And the task force was initiated on the 16th of June this year. It is chaired by both myself and the Energy Minister, Michael Shanks, to really try and bring together both devolved administrations, regulators, both in terms of leasing and owners of the seabed, and industry and regulators in terms of consenting, and also the policy departments involved in setting what is our energy system revenue mechanisms to understand how do we make this work. I think we now have an increasing body of evidence that marine energy will play a significant role and that has significant benefits that we needed to articulate and understand in terms of quantifiable data and knowledge capacity. So this forum was really to do that. So the Marine Energy Task Force kicked off in June of this year. It has 4 work streams that are focusing on the areas that we felt needed significant focus in order to unlock the industry and move the industry forward. And as we know, this forum is really talking about that and talking about how do we make this work. I think we've got a long history of developing technology. Now, how do we commercialize? The 4 work streams within the Marine Energy Task Force are site development. So that covers the leasing and the consenting of sites, looking at those environmental hurdles and barriers to development and deployment at scale. Innovation. So how do we continue to fund innovation in the research space? How do we continue to support reduction in levelized cost of energy? And as we know from the application of technologies in wind and solar, you're constantly innovating. So how do we continue that to make sure that we optimize tidal stream and wave technologies? Financing, so both project financing and capital into the industry to build facilities, to build technology, to build companies. So we have a project finance and a finance working group, also looking at revenue, so contracts for difference, which we won't go into a lot of detail in this introduction, but needless to say, the industry has placed itself within from AR4 onwards with a ring fence for tidal stream, and we have 121 megawatts of contracted capacity. So we're reviewing how that may work in the longer term for a sustainable industry and sustainable growth. And the final one is supply chain. So how can the supply chain engage with the sector? How can we see scaled growth that meets the needs of the industry as the capacity grows? And where are there any bottlenecks or issues? Interestingly, we have here in the UK the ability to deliver up to 90% UK content in these projects. So across the projects already deployed, we know we have the skills, the knowledge capacity, the facilities and the businesses that can really help this industry grow. So it's a unique value proposition from Wave and Tidal Stream that we know how to do this in the UK. We're a maritime nation. So the task force will run for a 12-month period from June 25 to June 26, at which point we are hopeful that we will produce a route map or a roadmap for the sector that will look at reduction in some of these hurdles and barriers to deployment and getting capacity in our waters, and how we extend that out to the export potential in that global market that I mentioned earlier. So it's a positive move. It's supported very broadly by the industry and by many stakeholders on this call. And we're delighted that we're getting the input. So we have a meeting now on the 16th of October of the core group, the government industry interface group. We're being strongly supported by the Crown Estates and the Crown Estate Scotland to deliver on that work, the owners and operators of the seabed. And we're looking forward to seeing the outcomes of that as we work with the sector and with stakeholders to hopefully deliver a plan for capacity and growth in the sector, which is much needed. And we'll probably come back to that at some point in terms of the need of, working together, collaborative approaches, and viewing this as an industry and not individual projects. So I hope that's useful, and I'm really happy to take any questions. And if anybody wants to be engaged or involved, we would be delighted to have you engage with the task force. But I am hopeful that we're now heading in the right direction for capacity and growth for the sector. Thanks, Tiernan.
Sue, thank you very much. Really good start there, and really good to hear about those different work streams and what's going on. I think a really important point, and one that we'll get into, is the need to work with devolved governments as well within that task force as well. Because I think it's clear that Scotland and Wales are leading and world leading in this. So working with those devolved administrations, I'm sure, is a key priority and something we'll get into as well. Sue, thank you very much. I'll move swiftly on then, so we can leave enough time for questions and comments. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, please do feel free to pop it into the Q&A function you can see at the top of your screen there, and we'll bank them for the Q&A session once all speakers have delivered their opening remarks. So, Eileen, I'll introduce you now. Imagine you're going to be talking very much about the innovation side of the conversation here, which is extremely important for this technology and the work that the European Marine Energy Centre does. Really, really interesting stuff. So Eileen, I'll hand over to you. If you want to introduce the centre and yourself and the work you do, that'd be great.
Thanks, Tiernan, and good morning, everybody. I am Eileen Linklater, Corporate Affairs Director here at EMEC in Orkney, and it looks just like the scene behind me today. Beautiful sunshine and some good waves on the go. I'm more junior to Sue, having only spent 15 years working in this sector. But in that time and working at EMEC, I've engaged with hundreds of technology developers worldwide. It feels like almost as many energy ministers along the way as also. But today, it feels like we're coming together at what really is a bit of a defining moment for the sector with the creation of the task force and the momentum we hope that's going to bring. So I was kind of hoping to, as Tiernan said, bring a perspective which is about how we drive commercialisation. How do we actually maximise the benefit from this sector? So first of all, for those of you unfamiliar with EMEC, EMEC is the world's only accredited test laboratory for marine energy. We are not for profit, totally independent, so we are technology agnostic. Our mission is simply to reduce the time, the cost and the risk of getting these new technologies to market. And we do that by operating test and demonstration facilities in Orkney, where we have the most brilliant wave and tidal resources. So the technology that is tested here is properly put through its paces. There's been £40 million invested into the test infrastructure in and around Orkney. And what we operate are fully consented, grid connected, and also non-grid connected sites in properly challenging resources to prove the technology. And also here in Orkney, our sites are now located amongst some of the most exciting wider energy systems and decarbonisation innovation projects that you'll find as well. So Orkney really is, I would say it's a lighthouse community for net zero. Our role within that landscape at EMEC is that we sit within the Valley of Death, for those of you familiar with the technology development pathway. So it's there's, I guess, more support available when you're at the design stages of new innovation, and it gets harder as you reach the stage where you're actually looking for private investment, and that gap is where a lot of innovation fails. So the idea behind EMEC is that we could help bridge that gap by providing facilities to test and validate technology. And that can help build the credibility and the bankability of projects in the future. So we've got loads of experience in that journey. And I guess it's from that viewpoint and many years of experience in the Valley of Death that I would say that commercialising new technologies is complex. And you really need a good strategic alignment between the technology push and the market pull. So in terms of the tech push, what we do is we help technology prove a whole range of stuff in a real sea environment. So it's about installability, survivability, reliability, scalability, grid integration, standardization, certification, the list goes on. But at our test sites now, we have tested 35 different wave and tidal devices from 22 different technology companies from 11 different countries. And what we've seen is that we are moving now away from the first of a kind prototype testing at large scale to array deployments. So we are preparing to deploy the first sort of tidal and wave farms over the coming years. All along the way, it is simply about learning by doing. The only source of knowledge is experience, and the development needs to be informed by real sea experience. So the tech push is great on one side, but what we also then need is the market pull on the other. And I think, as Sue alluded to, we have got a much better understanding of the value proposition of marine energy in terms of, what problem does marine energy actually solve in that future energy mix. And from my perspective, I do feel it's not about trying to find the cheapest source of power, but actually the highest value in that future energy mix. And Sue's already mentioned the fact that what Wave and Tidal offers is energy security. So it's homegrown energy as part of a post-2030 mix longer term. It's about system benefits, the predictability and the reliability of the power. And it's really a lot about green growth and the high levels of UK content in the projects that we've tested. But also the global leadership and the export opportunities that come from that as well. So through government-led incentives, we do now have a really strong pipeline with the ring fence support under the CFD programme. So we've got just under 25 megawatts of CFD supported projects coming to our sites over the next 5 years. And so what next? Well, I guess we are really enthusiastic about working more closely with public-private partnerships through the Marine Energy Task Force, with policymakers. There's a lot still to be done in terms of making sure that we have an eye on strategic planning for grid. That's critical. Also accelerating permitting and streamlining as much as we can that getting stuff into the water. But I think there's also a lot to be done in terms of working across sector. So again, I'm going to echo Sue's shout for collaboration. There's a lot we can do around co-location and shared offshore experience. At our sites in Orkney, we have developed an energy ecosystem around our test facilities. So we're not just testing the wave and tidal energy, but also the grid integration. We've got some green hydrogen production on our site as well as battery storage. So there's a whole systems integration piece that we are exploring, as well as a number of other alternative offtakes, such as synthetic fuels. So the supply chain development is really critical, and John, who will follow, is going to talk more about that, I'm sure. But for us, the pilot projects and getting the next flagship demonstrations in the water is really key to continue gathering the evidence, building that validation in the real environment, and building trust as well in the technology. So I would really highlight the fact that there are huge opportunities here, and would encourage everyone on the call, from whatever background you're coming from, to engage with the Marine Energy Council. And I will leave my contact details in the chat as well, because at EMEC we love to learn more about what everybody out there is doing that could actually add value to reducing time, cost and risk in this sector. So we're all about fostering innovation. So happy to take questions today, but I will leave contact details later. So I guess I would just round up by saying, in our experience here in Orkney, we have technology that's being proven. We've got a better understood value proposition from the sector coming forward. We've got a pipeline there with revenue support, which is building confidence. And so really, there are just so many opportunities to align what we're doing with that bigger clean power mission that the government has set out.
Eileen, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting to hear that perspective as well. I think that valley of death piece is, it's, you hear that across industries. I think it's really important to figure out how, in this country we manage that space better, and provide the support needed in order to scale. Because that is really what's going to drive down prices and get those projects to market. So I think that's really important, and excited to go into a bit more detail about that in the Q&A session as well. So thank you, Eileen. John, I'll hand over to you now. You're very welcome. I imagine supply chain is going to come up quite a bit here, but I'll hand over to you now, if you can deliver your opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Tiernan, for inviting me into this discussion. We've heard two naturally eloquent speakers before me. Just don't expect the same here, but we'll do the best we can for you. So I'm John Macleod. I'm here representing Leask Marine. It's a Scottish company that this year proudly celebrates 40 years in business. At Leask Marine, we've been fortunate to work at the heart of the UK's marine energy journey for over 2 decades now. We've completed over 1,000 projects, and we've worked with over 116 developers from 21 countries. In that time, we've physically installed multiple wave and tidal devices for 35 developers from 14 countries. We're based in Orkney, and we've seen in our time the sector grow from first tidal and wave prototypes through to cutting edge demonstrators, and now really into the exciting phase of array developments, and also for floating wind potential opportunities. At Leask Marine, our role has always been to help turn ideas into practical delivery in the sea. And we believe that perspective gives us a good sense of both opportunities, but also the challenges ahead. One of the things we've learned is that every successful deployment matters, whether it's in tidal stream device or a wave prototype or a floating wind platform. Getting hardware safely into the water and operating and back out again builds market confidence. Developers gain trust in the supply chain. Investors gain confidence that projects are real. And policymakers can see that these aren't just concepts, they work in real conditions. And that experience is the foundation for scaling up. So how do we accelerate that shift from single prototypes to full arrays? And what role should the UK play in leading that? I'm sure are questions that will come up. Another lesson is the value of embedding specialist skills in coastal communities. In Orkney, we've built up specialist vessels, subsea tooling, and our people now probably are recognised worldwide for their knowledge and experience in this market. Now, what that does is it creates sustainable jobs at home, but it also opens up huge export opportunities abroad. But folks, it's fragile. We saw that in 2014. If funding stops, projects stall, skills migrate, and we risk losing the capability the UK has really built over these past decades. So we need to understand what is the right balance between nurturing domestic capability and chasing international markets. We've had to innovate constantly here, designing bespoke vessels and our subsea tooling, and to refine our operations to help our developers and clients to cut costs and ultimately to cut risks. Innovation isn't just happening in our universities or in the UK's test labs. It's actually happening out there at sea and within the supply chain. And it's that operational innovation that will make marine energy competitive in the long term. So I suppose I've got another question, is how do we ensure innovation in the supply chain gets the same recognition and support as the technology innovation? We're all aware that none of this will scale without the right policy framework, and we at Leask have certainly seen that stop-start support, and that really undermines investment. What we need are stable, long-term mechanisms that reflect the unique characteristics of marine energy, a bit like tidal and waves predictability, and then in turn that gives investors certainty. With that, it's not too late for the UK. We can still lead globally, but without it, we really risk that we will slip behind here. So I suppose our other question is, what does stable, targeted framework for marine energy actually look like? And we, along with our colleagues in the Marine Energy Council, are trying to framework that. Finally, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear, I want to stress the human side. For us in Orkney, marine renewables aren't just abstract. They're actual jobs, they're apprenticeships, and they're opportunities that keep our young people in our coastal communities. They're also part of the UK's wider net zero pathway. We all know that this sector can deliver clean power, and we also know it can deliver regional economic growth at the same time. That's the kind of story that we need to tell if we want broad support. So how do we make sure local communities feel that the benefits of this transition? Lastly, my message today is pretty simple. Marine energy can deliver not just clean power, but jobs, exports, and industrial leadership. We've proved it works in the sea. The challenge is now how to scale it, how to secure policy certainty, and to ensure the UK keeps hold of the skills and the capabilities that we've built over the last 2 decades. So, Tiernan, I look forward to exploring these points further in the discussion with you and the rest of the team. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. Really, really interesting stuff there. And I think a fair bit to get into there as well in the Q&A session. So thank you very much. I'm afraid it hasn't been possible to get Richard into the call, so we'll move straight on then to the Q&A session, where we can kind of delve into a few more of those points raised in a bit more detail. As I mentioned, please do feel free to pop your questions and comments into that Q&A tab that you see at the top of your screen there. I'm going to kick off with a quick one, use chair's prerogative if I may. It's just going back to that to the Marine Energy Task Force, Sue, and Eileen and John, please feel free to come in as well if you have any thoughts. But you know, I'm just wondering if I can ask, what are the top immediate priorities right now? Is it outreach? Is that the main priority right now? Kind of getting as many views as you can on what the sector needs. And I'm wondering if you can also, do you have any thoughts on 12, 18 months time? What does success look like in the development of that roadmap and development of kind of a cohesive plan for the sector going forward? Any thoughts on that to kind of kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Tian. And I think that could be a whole hour's discussion on its own, to be frank. But certainly, the industry, what's really interesting about this sector is that we have some incredible knowledge capacity within the companies that are working on both technology, but on both, as you heard from John, installation of technology, providing sites for technology and others. So I think going into the task force, we had a fairly clear view in terms of both the opportunities, but the barriers, the hurdles that we're having to overcome to deliver technology that is both commercially viable, that also, as to John's point, which I think is hugely important, meets the needs of the communities within which it's being deployed. So creating that economic growth opportunity, the jobs, the diversification in regions that really don't have anything else that is really happening for them, and don't have other industries that are growing as this industry is. So I think there's a real opportunity there. So I think the industry, from the starting point, the industry and those involved in the industry, those supporters of wave and tidal stream, did have quite clear views, both through the reports and the information, the data that we've collected on what the priorities were. And it really falls under those 4 work package streams. So how do we create capacity? So how do we start now to open up the sites and develop the sites for deployment of wave and tidal stream technology? So those that have had a project development role will know that there is a long lead time from initially identifying a site that may have resource, whether that be tidal stream or wave, through to gaining your consents, your permits, through to gaining a lease, through to gaining access to revenue. So that there's a long lead time there to get these sites up and running. We have a view that we want to develop significant capacity in the UK by 2035. Whether that is a 1 gigawatt target for tidal and a 300 megawatt tidal target for wave, or whether it is simply seeing staged growth of this industry, we have a view that by 2035 we need to increase the capacity of deployed projects in the UK significantly if we want to unlock all of the benefits that we've all been talking about. So that's the long-term view. Then what you do from 2035 is you work backwards. What needs to happen now in the short term, what needs to happen in the medium term, and what needs to happen in the long term to ensure that those projects continue forward. So we're prioritizing those under the 4 work packages. So in terms of consenting and site development, where are the barriers, where are the opportunities, and we're running through a process of prioritization at the moment. For financing, clearly revenue and CFDs, continuity of them, long-term intent in terms of providing access to market is really important to the sector, and also being able to understand the opportunities within the financing sector for project finance. So organisations such as GB Energy, National Wealth Fund, working very closely with them to understand what their needs and opportunities are for this sector is really important in the finance section. I think that then helps bring in the capital investment, the equity stakes that may come in alongside. And certainly we want to make sure that revenue and project finance ability to support companies is there first, and then look at how we raise the capital against the markets that exist already. And that's an interesting conversation. So there is an awareness piece to this as well, in terms of bringing everyone up to the same level of understanding that the industry has. For innovation, John mentioned very clearly, we need innovation in the supply chain, but we also need innovation in the technology to both increase capability and efficiency of technology and drive out some of the risk, which makes them both certifiable under certification systems and warranties, insurance, etc., and those guarantees that we need. But we also need to innovate in the supply chain. How do we do this? These are challenging environments. What kind of vessels do we need? What kind of infrastructure and facilities do we need? So again, that engagement piece is really important to understand on both sides of the table what we anticipate is coming down the line and what we anticipate will be needed in the supply chain. And then certainly around the piece on site dev and innovation, it's really about where do they join up and where do we have synergies. And just as my colleagues were talking there, I was thinking about the growth that we have in our offshore industry. We have some of the best offshore engineers, some of the best knowledge capacity in offshore engineering. Where are the synergies and how do we diversify? So it's twofold. It's prioritization within those work packages, and it's raising awareness and having that two-way conversation about the art of the possible with the sector. And we hope at the end of that the Marine Energy Task Force will have a clear set of recommendations that will be both to UK government, but also to funders and to the industry itself about how we unlock the potential here and how we move this forward at scale. Because I think historically, we've had a very piecemeal approach to funding. We've had a lot of public sector support for the industry. We unlocked the revenue potential with AR4, Administrative Round 4 and the CFDs. We now need a plan as to how we fit all these pieces of the jigsaw together. So twofold: prioritization of barriers and opportunities, and engagement to make sure we've got those right and really articulated in a way that everyone understands.
Thank you, Sue. Very comprehensive answer there. Eileen, John, any comments to elaborate on that before I move on to the next question?
No, I think the reason as a supply chain business that we actively support the Marine Energy Council is the one thing that we advocate most is that we need long, stable policy frameworks to work to, because the investment in infrastructure to support the market needs to run either ahead of market along with the market. So therefore, for us to unlock private investment, we need stability above everything else, in my opinion, at this moment in time.
Thanks, John. Just to pivot then onto that kind of bankability and investment question, then we've seen in the subsequent AR rounds some real developments. AR5 was a real success, I think, especially for Tidal Stream. That we saw a ring-fenced pot for Tidal Stream, and that AR7 looks like it's changing kind of towards phased commissioning and flexible bidding, I think, to provide kind of more long-term certainty, and I think kind of reflect the complexities of offshore marine energy as well. Is that a good thing? What have you any thoughts on the direction of travel for AR7 and the contract allocation framework? What are you hoping to see from that in order to kind of inject some real funding into these projects and deliver some certainty as well? Any thoughts on that bankability side about kind of what's needed? Does anyone want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab at it, Tina. I mean, I think we understand as a sector that contracts for difference are the chosen revenue mechanism for UK government at the moment. They have a proven track record in driving out costs in offshore wind. However, the situation is slightly different for wave and tidal technologies in that we have a multitude of different technologies, often with different project financial needs and different cost profiling in terms of the cost of technology, cost of infrastructure, and other elements there. So what's really important is that we can work with government to make sure that there is accessibility and, as we've heard, long-term stability in CFDs for the technologies. It's very difficult for project financiers, those bringing the funding into the project finance, if they can only see single projects. So what's really important is that we have that long-term stability. Things like the Clean Industry Bonus extension to wave and tidal stream would be useful. Certainly, we know that the benefits, I talked about some of that 80 to 90% of UK content being in the UK, strategic direction to enable that to happen and to make sure that we secure that here, both for the domestic market, but also the global market is really important. So it's back to that question of how do we balance the mechanisms within AR7 And we've seen some interesting changes in terms of moving to capacity rounds rather than specific ring fences. So we were fortunate in AR4, for example, to have a 20 million ring fence for Tidal Stream, which allowed Tidal Stream to compete really on its own playing field. So we've seen some interesting evolutions in CFDs. I think it is welcome that there is a degree of flexibility to meet the needs of the industry, but I think it comes back to requiring intent for delivery of capacity that can then help shape that market, if that makes sense. So we need the CFDs to be reactive to a potential for growth. And we're seeing that start to occur, I think, predominantly through deep water floating offshore wind requirements to move that industry forward. But we're now seeing that it could be applicable to wave and tidal. So we welcome the flexibility there, but I think we need that to be over a longer term. And we need the CFDs to be responsive to what we know are beneficial technologies to the decarbonisation piece as well. It's complex, and the industry is responding as an industry rather than individual projects, which I think is really useful for those setting the parameters within CFDs. But we need to continue to do that. So it needs to be an active dialogue between industry and the market, really, to determine what is deliverable in over those time periods.
Thanks, Sue. I can see a question here in the chat from Bob McDonald. And Bob, thank you for the kind words at the start there. Bob believes that until the infrastructure for offshore wind is in place, predominantly the expensive electric cables, then it is unlikely that the economics will really work for wave/current. Bob feels that these technologies will be secondary in that case. Do the presenters believe that there are ways to accelerate marine energy adoption? And secondly, Bob says he's, having been in the subsea sector for many decades, he's always amazed at the lack of understanding that investors and developers have of the challenges and costs involved. It kind of goes to your point there, Sue. Steel is expensive, installation and intervention costs are expensive, marinization is essential, and reliability is vital. Bob says the numbers of investors who can write checks of the size needed is very limited. So another question there on how can we help technology developers really understand the challenges and address these as early as possible. Eileen, I'm wondering if you have anything to add on that and how you work with people joining your site.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to jump in on this one because both aspects of those questions are highly relevant to where we are and what we do. So firstly, on the grid point, I mentioned in the opening remarks that strategic planning is absolutely critical. So what we don't want to do is build stuff too small and in the wrong places. And we also don't want to, for example, see plans for offshore wind, which would end up sterilising important wave or tidal resource areas. So it needs to be much, much better forward thinking than we have seen in terms of how we get the grid to work. Now, where we sit in Orkney, we have a history of a critical lack of grid. So in terms of the test and demonstration projects that we've supported so far, they have been smaller scale. So they have been, single megawatt or 2 megawatt deployments, which we've managed to squeeze into the Orkney grid, which has been a net exporter of renewables since 2013. But what we've seen is renewables being constrained left, right, and centre. So it's something that we've had to grapple with already. And again, I did mention that every challenge is an opportunity where I work. And so we had to think creatively about how to get around those grid constraints then. And what we did was we moved towards producing green hydrogen. We also have installed battery storage. But these at a small scale are just sticky plasters. And when we're thinking bigger, we maybe need to think even greater in terms of what is the economic advantage that all the different technologies can bring. And it might not always be electrons down wires. So, for example, we have done some initial work in using our constrained tidal power to make green hydrogen to make synthetic fuel. making synthetic fuel in a place in the north of Scotland, it makes a lot of sense, because we have such a huge potential resource around us that actually the UK grid might not need all of that in the future. But so what else could we do with all that power? So it's both thinking strategically and also maybe thinking bigger, actually. So that's what I would say. Alternative offtake is one part of that, and strategic planning and now and quickly is the other part. So engaging with NESO and others is really critical. So that was the first part of the question. I don't know, should I move on to the second, or does anybody else want to weigh in on grid?
Not on grid, but maybe a segue into financing. One of the questions that was raised there was the lack of understanding by investors, and I think this is one of the areas that I would both, and strangely for me, defend in terms of the investors, but also really just a bit of a sort of exploration of that. So we now have the established organisation Great British Energy, which is a public-private partnership to deliver our decarbonisation and energy needs. So our first kind of UK-owned energy company. And interestingly, both discussions with National Wealth Fund and Great British Energy through the task force, have really led us to understand the challenges that investors have in coming to this sector and in backing it. And when you have a standard mandate within an investment portfolio that is applicable to technologies that have been proven at scale, that are certified, that have long-term reliability data, that have warranties, that are coming from companies that perhaps have huge balance sheets, that's a different proposition to new and emerging technologies. So it's very difficult for investors who have very small investment teams and perhaps a non-sectoral expertise piece there to grow their expertise if they don't have long-term sight of a market. So within the investment community, their ability to understand this technology and understand the challenges, the technical challenges that a lot of us are very close to, it is challenging, because if they put together a team of people that are reviewing, for example, tidal stream projects, at the moment we may only have 1 or 2, 3 projects that are investable. So they're not going to do that without long-term sight of a market and growth potential. And I think it's beholden on us to really look at things in a slightly different way and work with investors to ensure that the propositions going to them are sufficient and are well enough understood. So really providing that technology input into investors in a slightly different way, not just through a due diligence process, but working with them to inform that process, I think will unlock some of the investment potential. And certainly, one of the tick box exercises for investment is, do you have grid? Do you have consent? And do you have your lease for seabed? Which are all areas that we're trying to look at the challenges and opportunities for from an investment proposition proposal. I also think the position of the Crown Estates in terms of their future look through the Marine Development Route Map and how they're considering use of the seabed is really key to this industry. So we're starting to see a bit of a knitting together of policy, finance, and future look and market that I think we're really trying to speak to through the task force. But certainly investors have got a hard job to internally with their investment boards argue the case for supporting wave and tidal when there's no long-term view of where the industry is going, which I hope is something that the task force will be able to help with.
Thanks, Sue. Eileen, do you want to, or John, did you want to come in on any of that?
And I was just going to pick up the baton on that in that second point, the investment point. There is no getting away from a really important role for the public purse in this as well. And it's hard because tracking a return on investment around R&D is a difficult exercise. However, I think we can prove over our 20 years of what we do here in Orkney. So with that 40 million that was invested in EMEC's facilities and all the infrastructure to catalyse the innovation, we've seen a return to the UK economy of 370 million GVA. So that's like an 8-fold return there, and so many important developments, world-leading UK companies who have reaped the benefit of being able to practice their craft by having that support in place. So we do still need more of that, because I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of the supply chain innovation and capturing a lot of the opportunities, not just for energy security, but also for export. But also, I think we need to look at how we incentivise the private investment too. What can government do to make that easier? So, I think Sue made a really good case there in terms of how we make it more attractive, but how do we make it easier as well? So I think we get an awful, really hung up on subsidies control. I think there's more that could be done to make it easier for R&D tax breaks to be achieved for bigger investors, and for SMEs, and even engaging in innovation. It's tough, it's a tough economic climate, and so to persuade people to invest some of their money into innovation, we need to make it attractive as possible. But there's definitely a benefit to be had, and the benefit to be had is the green growth that we so desperately need. This is a set, in terms of looking around for sectors where there is green growth, this is absolutely one. So how do we make that as easy as possible to achieve?
John, any thoughts on how we do that?
Well, from my perspective, I suppose the best way to help technology developers, from my perspective, we see new technology developers coming through, and they're either trying to do everything or, I want to do everything, where I'm saying, leave the expertise in the supply chain as it is. And especially when it comes to engineering and engineers, I think there needs to be a deeper collaboration within the supply chain, personally. And I think we need to create a transparent feedback culture within the industry to help the industry for standardization, everything from components and all the lessons learned from those that have gone before in terms of modernization, in terms of O&M costs. Everybody's concentrates on getting that initial installation, but we need to get beyond that. So from my point of view, deep collaboration with supply chain, lessons learned. We give lessons learned workshops to industry, and we feel that there's a lot from Wave and Tidal that actually floating wind could learn from all the experiences as well. So, we've got decades of experience. I think we need to make sure that technology developers are aware of that as well.
John, thanks very much. I want to very quickly hone in on a point that you made there in your remarks about embedding these special skills within coastal communities. First of all, we see that the supply chain is around 80% UK based. That there's potential for 90% of the supply chain to be located here. And I think this goes to the heart of GB Energy as well, and why it is situated where it is in the north of Scotland, and kind of this transition from oil and gas to renewables and that kind of thing. How do we keep the benefits of investment in marine and tidal energy within those local communities? Is there a chance there to do things differently in terms of how we kind of fund these projects and develop the people power in order to resource them as well, and kind of keep those benefits very local within local communities? And I think that will probably increase buy-in as well for these projects too. Do the panel have any thoughts on that? John, do you have any thoughts on that first of all?
I mean, I suppose we're exceptionally lucky because we have EMEC on our doorstep, so to speak, and we've got the universities, I think, need much more support in getting the younger generation through. We've got, under the age of 30, we have here naval architects, design engineers, mechanical engineers, and we're training offshore managers. And also our crews are 70% ex-fishermen. All we're doing is, or fishermen's families, sorry. So what we're doing is we are ensuring that we take the expertise from the youngsters, but we get that health and safety culture in there. So across a broad range of skills, we are lucky, but we need more. And we need them in Pembrokeshire, and we need them in other parts of Wales. We need them northeast of England. So from our point of view, we need to give more support to, I believe, universities, and as an industry, get the excitement of this renewable industry within the UK, because it is worldwide. We've got people coming, students come from all over the world to the UK still to learn and to stay in the industry. But I think we need more UK-based support in that sphere.
Thanks, John. Eileen and Sue, any thoughts here? Sue, is this going to be, I imagine, something that the task force will really hone in on as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of reports on diversification, and whether it's or whether it's not decline of or slightly phasing out of hydrocarbon industry, the defence industry. We have a challenge there in terms of some of the roles that John described. Our naval arcs, our marine engineers. There are long-term, well-paid jobs within other sectors. And it is difficult if you run a company developing these technologies to find those people and those skills, because there is a challenging market. And I think, again, having a map which shows that there is potential growth and long-term sustainable jobs that are highly technical within this industry is really, really important. So setting that future plan for where these jobs will be. And I think, just to the points, I think, EMEC and Orkney in itself, having spent a long time there personally, is a really great microcosm for describing how the marine energy industry can grow. And we have a similar organisation in Morlais, in Mentamon, in North Wales, off Anglesey, where we have technologies due to be deployed there. But, really looking at how those communities have changed and grown through marine energy, albeit in its limited growth at the moment, with that 120 megawatts of contracted, and all of the technologies that have been tested in EMEC, and all of the technologies that John's company has been involved in putting in the water, taking out of the water, decommissioning. I think there's a lot more to understand about how we can draw on skills and experience. It is a different sector. It is not directly applicable in all cases. And John spoke to the health and safety piece, but we need to plan for it, and we need to, I suppose, expose people to the potential. But I do think there's a lot of challenges there in terms of where people go, and where the jobs are, and how we create an industry around this. But certainly, I think it's a very exciting industry to be involved in, and I think it's something that a lot of young people are very excited about. We've got to make sure that we grow that optimism into jobs and opportunities around the UK coastline, because ultimately the jobs will be where the resource is, and we know where the resource is, so we can see clearly how we're going to get jobs and opportunities in regions that don't have a huge range of other options. So I think it's an exciting time, but I think there are challenges again, and hopefully, again, the task force will try and understand some of those and pick them and give us a route forward.
Yeah, well said, Sue. I wish we could go on, but we've got a hard stop at 11. I'm wondering if in just a few words, then, we're seeing a real pipeline of projects develop now. We've got the task force, which is kind of knitting it all together, and buy-in from the Crown Estate and from government. In a few short words, what are the key things that we need to do now, then, in order to realize the benefits of what we've discussed today, and kind of looking at that best case scenario for marine offshore marine energy? What are those key things that we need to do right now in order to really propel the industry forward? Sue, I'll start with you. Any closing thoughts on that?
I think we need to ensure as a sector that we are all as confident as the technology and project developers are. I think there's a lack of understanding from those outside of the industry on how far we've come in the last 10 years. I think there's real good technology data. I think there's really good cost data, risk analysis, and industry analysis. It's beholden on the industry to inform those outside of the industry, and we need a plan for growth.
Sue, well said. Thank you very much. Eileen, final thoughts.
I resoundingly support the words Sue put together, but from our perspective, we need to accelerate, we need to get more in the water, and that's where we actually learn the practical application and the practical opportunities of how we grow the sector. And then I would also just add in that outreach. There's so much like transferable knowledge around this and other sectors that we can bring together more effectively. So a plea for more collaboration.
Brilliant. John, final word to you then.
Last words from me probably are that we have deployment experience, we have the supply chain strength, we've got policy engagement, but I believe that what real adequate political support, I think the next generation really is one where I believe that ocean energy moves decisively from demonstration to industrial reality.
Brilliant. John, thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of our speakers there. You know, at Foresight Events, we're all about that new technology and that, you know, technology with the highest potential. And I think now is a really good time to discuss offshore marine energy. You know, there's some real developments happening right now, and it's as you mentioned, Sue, an exciting time to be part of the industry. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thank you for joining us from the floor as well. Just a reminder that this session, as well as others within the webinar series, are part of the Foresight event taking place next February, our All Energy Clean Tech show, where we'll be diving into these conversations and many more sectors that are kind of driving us towards net zero and a sustainable energy mix for a strong and clean economy as well. If that is of interest, please do feel free to check out our website and get your tickets. Our lineup's already developing really well, and we're working hard to get many more really good speakers on board as well. So with that, again, I'll say thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's been a really good discussion, hopefully the first of many more to come. And with that, I'll say enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks again, and we do hope to see you again in the future. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thanks, Tina.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.